The silence came first. It didn't ask for permission. It arrived quietly, replacing conversations with echoes. Messages stopped. Invitations disappeared, and the warmth you once felt from others began to dissolve into a cold distance you couldn't explain. Then came the rejection. Not always loud. Sometimes it was a shift in tone, a delayed response, a look that told you you no longer belonged. You tried to adjust, to hold on, to understand, but it only pushed you further away. And finally, isolation. Not just being alone, but feeling cut off, like the world was still, spinning, still laughing, still living. But without you, you asked yourself what you did wrong, what part of you needed to change, why love, connection, and belonging always seemed to slip through your hands the moment you got close. But what if none of it was a mistake? Carl Jung believed that the soul initiates its deepest transformation not when everything is going well, but when everything falls away, when the persona cracks, when the world stops reflecting who you thought you were, when you are no longer sustained by outer validation and are forced, at last, to turn inward. This video is not about fixing what broke, it's about seeing what was being born, because sometimes silence is not absence. It's space being made. Sometimes rejection is not punishment. It's protection. And sometimes isolation is not loneliness. It's the sacred cocoon of becoming. If you felt invisible, excluded, disconnected, this message is for you. Not to pull you back into the world, but to call you back to yourself. You are not falling apart. You are falling inward, and that's where the real journey begins. The silence came first. It didn't ask for permission. It arrived quietly, replacing conversations with echoes. Messages stopped. Invitations disappeared. And the warmth you once felt from others began to dissolve into a cold distance you couldn't explain. Then came the rejection. Not always loud. Sometimes it was a shift in tone, a delayed response, a look that told you no longer belonged. You tried to adjust, to hold on, to understand, but it only pushed you further away. And finally, isolation. Not just being alone, but feeling cut off, like the world was still spinning, still laughing, still living. But without you, you asked yourself what you did wrong, what part of you needed to change, why love, connection, and belonging always seemed to slip through your hands the moment you got close. But what if none of it was a mistake? Carl Jung believed that the soul initiates its deepest transformation not when everything is going well, but when everything falls away, when the persona cracks, when the world stops reflecting who you thought you were, when you are no longer sustained by outer validation and are forced, at last, to turn inward. This video is not about fixing what broke, it's about seeing what was being born, because sometimes silence is not absence. It's space being made. Sometimes rejection is not punishment. It's protection. And sometimes isolation is not loneliness. It's the sacred cocoon of becoming. If you felt invisible, excluded, disconnected, this message is for you. Not to pull you back into the world, but to call you back to yourself. You are not falling apart. You are falling inward, and that's where the real journey begins. Silence has a strange way of entering your life. At first, it feels like something has gone wrong. People stop reaching out. The noise that once filled your days, the messages, the attention, the distractions, fades. You're left with long stretches of stillness, empty rooms, quiet mornings, nights that echo, and the mind panics. Why is this happening? Did I do something wrong? Why does no one see me anymore? But what if the silence wasn't rejection, but redirection? Carl Jung believed that the soul often uses discomfort to initiate awakening, that the very things we try to avoid, aloneness, stillness, disconnection, are the conditions the psyche needs to begin remembering itself. The noise of the world has a way of covering up your truth, As long as you're surrounded by voices, opinions and distractions, you don't have to listen to your own. You can stay in motion. You can stay on the surface. But when silence comes, it strips all of that away. And what's left? Jungian without the masks, without the roles, without the constant feedback that tells you who to be. And at first it hurts, because silence exposes the parts of you that were never fully healed. It shines a light on the grief you tucked away. It brings up the questions you've avoided for years. It reveals the emptiness that no amount of productivity could ever fill. But that's not a punishment. It's a cleansing. Jung wrote that when the ego loses the outer world, it gains access to the inner world. The silence becomes a doorway, a thin space between your old life and the life that's waiting to emerge. In the silence, you begin to notice things you hadn't before, the patterns that no longer serve you, the relationships that were built on performance, the habits that numb instead of heal, and underneath all of that, a voice begins to return, a quieter voice, one that doesn't shout, but hums from somewhere deep inside you, a voice that says, "This is who you are," beneath the noise, a voice that doesn't need approval or applause, just space. The truth is, silence is not the enemy. It's the beginning of presence. It's the soil where awareness grows. It's the container your soul has been waiting for. You weren't abandoned. You were invited into the most intimate relationship you'll ever have, the one with yourself. But that relationship doesn't begin with words. It begins with listening, with stillness, with the courage to sit in your own presence without trying to escape it. So if silence has come into your life, don't rush to fill. Sit with it, breathe into it, let it speak, because what it has to offer you is everything the noise could never give. Rejection has a way of striking at the most sensitive part of us. It doesn't just say, "You're not wanted." It whispers something deeper. You're not enough. And when it comes, whether as a breakup, a friendship that fades, a family that never saw you, or a community that never embraced you, it cuts. Quietly, repeatedly, deeply. But what if rejection, painful as it is, isn't what it seems? Carl Jung believed that we live most of our early lives through the lens of the persona, the part of us we construct to gain love, safety, and approval. This mask is shaped by what we think the world wants from us, but no matter how carefully we build it, rejection still comes. And when it does, it feels like the entire self is being invalidated. But Jung would say, perhaps the rejection wasn't about you at all. Perhaps it was the universe removing people and situations that were never meant to connect with the real you, only with the version you created to survive. Rejection, in this view, becomes an invitation, not to try harder, not to change who you are, but to ask, was I truly being myself in that connection? And if you were showing up with honesty, with heart, with authenticity, and still weren't met with presence or care, then the rejection is not a loss, it's alignment. Because when you stop chasing validation, you start discovering truth. And the truth is, not everyone will recognize your depth. Not everyone will understand your silence. Not everyone will be able to hold the weight of your honesty. But that doesn't make you wrong, it makes you rare. Jung also taught that what we don't accept in ourselves, we project onto others. Often when people reject you, they are not rejecting you. They are rejecting what your presence activates in them. Your truth may unsettle their illusions, your strength may mirror their weakness, your clarity may expose their confusion, and, rather than face themselves, they turn away from you. That's not cruelty, that's fear. Fear of being seen, fear of being transformed, and so they leave. Or distance themselves, or treat you in ways that reinforce your old wounds, but this time you see it differently. You no longer chase, You no longer twist yourself into who you think they want. You no longer beg to be understood by those who haven't even begun to understand themselves. You begin to let go, not with bitterness but with wisdom, because rejection in its deepest form is often redirection. It's a gate closing, not to punish you, but to protect your soul from shrinking for love. And sometimes the greatest affirmation isn't someone staying. It's you staying with yourself even after they've gone. There's a certain kind of loneliness that doesn't just echo in your environment. It echoes inside you, even when you're in a room full of people, even when you're smiling, responding, showing up. Something inside remains untouched, unseen, unmet. And for many, that space begins to feel like a void. But what if that void isn't empty? What if it's sacred? Carl Jung wrote extensively about the archetype of the hermit, the solitary figure who retreats from the world, not to escape it, but to understand it. This withdrawal isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's the soul's way of creating space for transformation. When the external world no longer provides meaning, your inner world begins to awaken, and that awakening rarely happens in crowds. It happens in the silence of long nights, in the ache of absence, in the sudden spaciousness that once terrified you and now invites you to listen. You might not have chosen isolation, but your soul did. Because when everything is stripped away, the roles, the attention, the validation, you're left with the raw material of your being, and only in that rawness can something new begin. Isolation is not punishment, it's initiation. It's the fire that burns away everything that is not you, so that what is you can finally breathe. This is where individuation begins, the process Jung called the return to the self. The journey of uniting all the fragmented, silenced, and rejected parts of who you are into a whole living truth. But individuation requires solitude, not forever, but long enough for you to stop echoing the world and start responding to your own voice. And in that solitude, something beautiful starts to happen. The silence no longer feels like a threat, it becomes comfort. The absence of others no longer feels like failure, it becomes freedom. The void you feared is no longer hollow, it becomes fertile. This is where your real self is growing, not under spotlights, but under the soil. Because the self is not loud, it's not flashy. It doesn't compete for attention. It emerges slowly, quietly, in moments when no one else is watching. And when it does, you begin to feel differently. Not necessarily happier, but deeper. Not more popular, but more present, not more understood, but more whole. So if you find yourself in isolation, don't rush to escape it. Let it shape you, let it strip you. Let it show you who you are when no one is watching. Because the version of you that emerges from this is not the one who was broken, but the one who was becoming. There's a moment in the journey when the old identity just stops working. The roles you used to play, the image you maintained, the words you used to say just to be accepted, they start to feel heavy, false, hollow, and you try, for a while, to hold it together. You smile even when it feels forced. You nod along when your soul is screaming no. You keep performing, hoping it will feel real again, but it doesn't. Because the persona, the psychological mask we wear to navigate the world, can only take you so far. Carl Jung taught that the persona is necessary in early stages of life. We need it to relate, to protect ourselves, to function. But if we confuse it for who we really are, we lose contact with the self. We become a role, not a reality. And eventually the soul begins to rebel, not with rage, but with weariness. A deep, soul-level exhaustion that says, I can't keep being this version of me anymore. That's not failure, that's truth. The moment your persona begins to collapse is the moment your real self starts breathing again. Yes, it can be terrifying. You might feel like your life is falling apart. Friendships fade, work no longer fulfills. Your old dreams dissolve into questions, but what's really dissolving isn't your life. It's the illusion that was keeping you from it. The persona is built for survival. The self is built for truth. And when the persona cracks, the self has room to rise. It doesn't shout. It doesn't strive. It simply returns. In the spaces where the image breaks, your essence slips through. In the moments when you forget how to pretend, you remember how to be. It's not always pretty. The Kiao collapse is messy. It feels like confusion, grief, even despair, but it's also holy. Because in that collapse, you begin to ask different questions. What do I actually value? What do I feel when no one's watching? Who am I without the validation? And slowly the answers begin to form, not as ideas but as felt truths. You start to move differently, speak more slowly, say no more often. You stop reaching outward for approval and start reaching inward for alignment. And that alignment brings something you hadn't felt in a long time: energy. Not because you're doing more, but because you're no longer leaking energy into a version of yourself that isn't real. When the persona falls, the real you stands, not polished, not perfect, but powerful, because you are no longer afraid to be seen as you are. So if everything is falling apart right now, let it. Don't rush to rebuild the image. Let it break. Let it burn. Because what rises from those ashes will finally be true. There is a part of you that has always been whole. It's not the part that adjusts, not the part that explains itself, not the part that seeks permission to exist. It's the part that simply is, constant, undeniable, quietly, waiting beneath the noise. Carl Jung called this the self, the totality of who you are beneath the masks, beyond the trauma, past the roles. Not the inflated ego, not the shrunken identity, but the deep, centered, ancient presence within you that never left. And here's the paradox. The self doesn't awaken in applause. It doesn't show up when everything is working. It doesn't emerge through external validation or constant activity. It awakens when the world goes silent. It stirs when you're sitting alone on your bedroom floor at 3 a.m., asking questions no one can answer for you. It rises when you've been emptied of everything you thought defined you: titles, relationships, achievements. It speaks when you stop trying to be anything and simply allow yourself to feel everything. Because the self doesn't need performance, it needs space. And silence creates that space. Rejection forces it. Isolation deepens it. Each of those painful experiences, the ones you thought were setbacks, were actually sacred rearrangements. Not to punish you, but to clear the path, to dismantle the layers that were shielding your soul from its own voice. The self is not a goal to achieve, it's a presence to remember, a recentering, a return. And when you feel it, something clicks, not in the mind, in the body, a stillness, a clarity, a quiet confidence that doesn't need to shout or prove. You no longer feel the need to convince anyone of your worth. You no longer crave validation from places that once rejected you. You stop reaching and instead begin receiving, not from the outside, but from within. And this changes everything. Your decisions come from alignment, not fear. Your energy flows instead of being drained. Your relationships deepen, not because you chase them, but because you finally resonate with truth. You start attracting differently, because you're no longer vibrating with the pain of who you were trying to be. You're grounded in the power of who you actually are, and the people who couldn't hear you before, they're no longer your audience. Because the self doesn't need a crowd, it needs coherence. So if you've been broken open by silence, rejection, and isolation, if you've been emptied of who you thought you were, good. you're closer, now than you've ever been. Because the soul does not rise when you are full. It rises when you are ready, and readiness often feels like falling apart. But what's really happening is that you're falling back into yourself. So maybe now you understand. The silence wasn't emptiness. The rejection wasn't failure. The isolation wasn't abandonment. They were all invitations. They weren't pushing you away from the world. They were pulling you back to yourself. Because sometimes life doesn't ask you to grow louder, stronger, more visible. It asks you to grow inward, to soften, to surrender what was never yours, to sit in the dark long enough to realize that your own light never left. You were never being punished. You were being prepared. You didn't lose everything. You lost what wasn't aligned with who you were becoming, and now what remains is real. The friends who stayed, the thoughts that still feel true, the stillness that doesn't scare you anymore. That's not the end of your story. That's the beginning of your selfhood. Here at the Psychic Gate, we honor that process, the slow becoming, the hidden breakthroughs, the quiet revolutions of the soul. And if this video met you where words usually fail, then you're ready for what comes next. Tomorrow at 7 p.m. we open a new door. We'll talk about a truth you've felt but never knew how to name, that the more you chase love, the further it runs, and that the moment you stop running after it, something changes. Not in the world, but in you. The next step in this journey is letting love find you. Not through need, but through presence. Not through effort, but through alignment. If today was a return to yourself, tomorrow will be the return of what you stopped searching for. Come back, let yourself be found, not by the world, but by what you now radiate. Love begins where the pretending ends.